These are the two things I got from the United Nations, a bad escalator and a bad teleprompter. The crisis of uncontrolled migration. It's uncontrolled. Your countries are being ruined. The United Nations is funding an assault on Western countries. No more global warming, no more global cooling. All of these predictions made by the United Nations and many others, often for bad reasons, were wrong. They were made by stupid people.
U.S. President Donald Trump addressing the United Nations General Assembly this week, and as you just heard, he didn't hold back. Attacking the multilateral body on a whole host of issues from climate change to migration to pesky escalators. In the room for Trump's speech, outgoing Canadian ambassador to the United Nations, Bob Rae. And Ambassador Rae joins me now. Hi, Ambassador. Pleasure to see you as always. Thanks for making the time.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you, Bashi.
Thanks a lot for making for doing so. I wanted to start off on what our audience just heard from Donald Trump's remarks to the UN earlier this week. In it, he took aim at the UN itself. I know I don't have to tell you, but for people who didn't see, said to the member countries assembled there, your countries are going to hell over the issue of migration, called climate change the biggest hoax ever. I was wondering if, in your view, the UN has figured out what the absence of U.S. leadership on those issues means for us collectively, do you think?
Well, we're talking about that. Obviously, there's a change in American foreign policy, which is, in the case of something like development assistance, has been absolutely drastic and very damaging for a whole lot of people living all around the world. But I think that there is a very profound sense at the UN that we didn't create migration. It's not an invented thing. It's movement of people is happening, and in some cases it's caused by climate change, which he doesn't believe in, but it actually exists. And in some cases it's caused by conflict, which also exists and is quite deep. And so I think, everyone listened attentively. I mean, the place was packed. We don't think climate change is a hoax. We don't think that immigration is a conspiracy. And in fact, I suspect that Donald Trump came from somewhere, and his family did, and mine did too, and I dare say so did yours. So it's pretty hard to say this is a terrible thing, but uncontrolled migration is a problem, and that's what we're dealing with at the moment in some places because of the amount of conflict and the amount of poverty and difficulty in many countries, and because there's a sense that if you move in a certain direction, people will automatically, let you in. And I think that's what he's trying to fight against. But I think he did it in the unique way that he has of talking.
I want to actually jump off that point and ask you, because President Zelensky, also from Ukraine, addressed the UN, and part of what he said was actually kind of like a criticism of the effectiveness or lack thereof, as he viewed it, of international institutions like the UN in being able to do things like actually stop the war that his country is now fighting. You've been there, I know that you're there for a few more months, and we've talked about, debates around the effectiveness of the UN before, but I'm wondering now, as you look back over the last 5 years, if you think there is the possibility that the UN at some point will be able to effectively counter what President Zelensky is saying, and will be able to have more meaningful, a more meaningful ability to, for example, stop a war.
Yeah, I agree with just about everything President Zelensky says, except that we all have to understand that the reason the UN isn't able to stop Russian aggression, for example, as effectively as he would like us to be able to, is not because of the UN. It's because of member states. Under the UN Charter, Ukraine has the full right to defend itself. Other countries have the full right to join them in the fight, to send troops, to do whatever would be required. The decision by NATO countries not to get involved militarily in the defense of Ukraine had nothing to do with the UN Charter, nothing to do with, quote, what's wrong with the UN. It had to do with member states deciding that that's not what they wanted to do. So sometimes blaming the UN is sort of like blaming Madison Square Garden when the Knicks don't win. I mean, it's the people who play on the court that have to bear some responsibility for not winning the game. And I think that's harder to do in a speech because it's easier to beat up on the UN. Can the UN be better? Can it be better reformed? Can we get the UN to have more power? That's up to member states. Member states will decide that. It's not going to be decided by somebody waving a wand or, Antonio Guterres saying, give me my army and I'll go. He doesn't have an army. He doesn't have an army because the member states won't give him one. So that's the problem.
I think, yeah, and I totally understand that point. I think my interpretation of his comments was basically that while all that's true, and particularly in this case, for example, Russia holding a veto power, that, the institution itself cannot, in those instances, exercise power that in any way can even come close to combating what you just described, right? The actions and the intent of member states. And that is maybe like a live discussion. I'm not necessarily saying that I agree with like condemning the institution itself, but I do think like you arrive at a point where people question the effectiveness or the utility of it if it is, just as easy that Ukraine or Russia can dominate the UN.
Well, what I'm saying is, Vashi, is just to repeat, not to repeat, but try to perhaps to re-express the thought. The problem with what happened in Ukraine is not the Russian veto. Let's be clear. The problem is that member states have only been willing to go so far in their support of Ukraine. That's the problem. And they have only been willing to go so far, not because of the veto in the UN, but because Russia is a nuclear power. And there are many countries that have taken the view as we don't want to put them in a position where that's where they might say that's the only way to solve the problem. I'm not saying I agree with that either, but I do think it's actually a mistake to say, oh, it's the UN, because when you do that, you sort of avoid taking responsibility yourself for saying, is there something more that we could have done? And I think that's a more real question for Canadians. And frankly, for Americans and for other leaders and other people around the world, is not the UN. It's about what could I do that would make a difference? What could I have done that will actually push the Russians back? We're facing it with a reality that the thing that's kept Russia at bay has been the incredible sacrifice and courage of the Ukrainian people, and the support as far as it has gone for Ukraine from a number of countries that decided that they wanted to do that. All of which, by the way, is perfectly permissible under the UN Charter. All been perfectly provided for. That doesn't mean the UN doesn't need to change. It doesn't mean the UN doesn't need to reform. But it also means you can never take away the responsibility that we all have for making a difference in the world. That's not something you can blame on an institution. That's something we have to accept for ourselves.
Yeah, totally fair point. I don't think President Zelensky has had any shortage of holding member states to account on an individual basis either, but I do understand what you're saying. Yeah.
And he's quite right. And in conversation, he's very blunt about it, and he's very direct with world leaders. And that's only appropriate. The guy's fighting for his country. He's fighting for the life of his people. Of course he's going to do that. I
had just one more question for you, Ambassador, before we go, and that's around you mentioned Prime Minister Netanyahu addressing the UN. I read in The Guardian, for example, that number of people, 100 diplomats from over 50 countries walked out. We saw some of the visuals representing that. My understanding is that you did not, that you stayed to listen to the speech, and I just wanted to know why.
Because that's my job. My job is to listen to people, and I don't think we're ever going to get anywhere if we don't try to listen to people, understand what are they saying, why are they saying it the way they're saying it, and that's my job. My job is to listen to other people. In many cases, listen to people I don't agree with. I've listened to I don't know, Lavrov. I've listened to the Russian ambassador on Ukraine. I don't agree with the word he says, but I listen to him, and I think that's part of what diplomacy is all about. I also think it's good practice, and I think we're not going to engage in a performative gesture at this point. I think it's important for us to try to figure out what are the solutions and how can we get there.
I'll leave it on that note. Ambassador, a pleasure as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good to talk to you.
Coming up, gun buyback bungled. The public safety minister faces intense scrutiny this week after a leaked audio recording has him casting doubt on the long-promised gun buyback, while Tories want to see the program scrapped altogether. What's at stake? Our Sunday strategy session with Kathleen Monk, Corey Tenike, and Scott Reed is coming up next.